There is a version of you that you have not encountered yet. A version that moves through the world without apology, without hesitation, and without the need for anyone's applause. A version so locked in, so quietly ferocious, that the people around you will feel it before you say a single word. They will not be able to explain it. They will not be able to name it, but they will feel the shift, and it will make them deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. You want to know why most people never reach that version of themselves? It is not because they lack talent. It is not because the world was unfair to them. It is because they are in love with the idea of discipline while being completely addicted to the feeling of comfort. They want the result. They do not want the surgery required to get there. They want the transformation, but they refuse to put the old self on the table and cut it open. Machiavelli did not write for those people. He never did. He wrote for the ones who were willing to face reality in all of its cold, undecorated truth. He wrote for the strategists, the ones who could look at themselves honestly, identify the rot, and burn it out without flinching. That is who this is for. If you are here because you are tired of being the person who talks about changing and never actually does, stay. Because we are going to take apart every mechanism that keeps you small, and we are going to rebuild something that the average person cannot touch. But I need to warn you, this is not the kind of self-improvement that feels warm. This is not the kind that tells you to love yourself more, or to be gentle with your journey. That is medicine for people who are slightly uncomfortable. What we are about to do is something different. We are performing surgery on the architecture of your mind. And surgery, by its nature, requires you to be opened up before you can be healed. So let us begin. The first thing you need to understand is why discipline is the most misunderstood concept in modern culture. People treat it like a personality trait, like something you either have or you do not. They talk about it the way they talk about eye color. He is just disciplined. She was born that way. This is a lie that weak people tell themselves so they never have to confront the real reason they keep failing. Discipline is not a trait. It is a decision that gets made every single day in the dark, when no one is watching, when there is nothing to gain from it, in the immediate moment, except the knowledge that you did not surrender. Machiavelli understood the mechanics of power better than almost any man who ever lived. And the first thing he recognized was this: the man who cannot govern himself cannot govern anything. Not a business, not a relationship, not a room. Before you can project power outward, you must establish absolute authority over your own interior world. Your thoughts, your impulses, your emotions, your hunger for comfort. All of it must answer to something higher. That higher thing is your will, and your will is a muscle. Right now, for most of you, it is severely underdeveloped. Not because you are weak by nature, but because you have been living in an environment specifically engineered to make you weak. Everything around you is designed to extract your attention and trade it for a small hit of dopamine. Your phone, the algorithm, the social culture that rewards you for performing your life rather than actually living it. You are swimming in a current that is pulling you toward softness. And the only way to move against that current is to make a decision so complete, so total, that it reorganizes how you move through every single hour. That decision is this: you are no longer governed by how you feel. You are governed by what you decided. This is the foundation. Everything else builds from it. When you operate from this place, something begins to happen that most people never experience. You stop being predictable in the way that weak people are predictable. The person who only works when they are motivated is completely readable. You know exactly how to disrupt them, disturb their mood, remove their enthusiasm, introduce a crisis, and they collapse. They fold. But the person who has severed the connection between their emotional state and their output, that person is something else entirely. You cannot get to them through the usual channels. You cannot demoralize them because their action does not depend on morale. You cannot wait them out because they do not stop when it gets hard. They accelerate. Machiavelli wrote about this quality in the great commanders he studied. The ones who were truly dangerous were not the ones who fought well when conditions were favorable. They were the ones who fought better when conditions were terrible. That adaptability, that refusal to be broken by circumstance, is what made empires, and it is what makes men formidable in the modern world. So how do you build this? How do you actually become the person who cannot be disrupted? It starts with something that sounds almost too simple. You must stop negotiating with yourself. This is the central disease of the undisciplined mind. The internal negotiation. The alarm goes off, and immediately the bargaining begins. What if I do it later? What if I just do half today? What if I take a break this once and make up for it tomorrow? What you are doing in that moment is allowing your emotions to hold a seat at the table where your decisions are made. And emotions are extraordinarily bad advisors. In the short term, they are wired for survival, not for greatness. They tell you to rest when you should work. They tell you to retreat when you should advance. They tell you to protect yourself when the only thing that will actually protect you is forward movement. The second you allow them to vote on whether or not you execute, you have already begun to lose. Machiavelli had a term for the quality required to override this. He called it virtù. Not virtue in the moral sense, not goodness or kindness. He meant something closer to prowess. The raw capacity to impose your intention upon reality, regardless of what reality is doing to resist you. The man who possesses virtù does not wait for favorable winds. He rows, and if the oar breaks, he swims. This is the quality you are building, not a comfortable life, not a pleasant inner experience. Absolute functional power over your own behavior. Now let us talk about what this looks like in the real world. Because there is a specific phenomenon that happens when someone genuinely achieves this level of self-command. The people around them begin to react differently, not because that person is loud, not because they are demanding or aggressive. Quite the opposite. The truly disciplined person is often strikingly quiet. They do not announce their plans. They do not seek validation for their effort. They do not perform their ambition on social media. They simply move. And that quality of silent, consistent, relentless movement creates an energy that people sense on a primal level. It triggers something ancient in the human nervous system, because we are wired to detect threat and capability. And a person who cannot be disrupted, who cannot be read, who keeps moving no matter what, registers as something more powerful than ourselves. It creates respect, and sometimes it creates fear. Not the fear of violence, the fear of being outpaced, the fear of being rendered irrelevant. That quiet, slow-building terror that you might be left behind. Let that be the byproduct. Do not chase it. Chase the standard, and let what other people feel about it be entirely their business. The second principle comes from one of the most underappreciated lessons in all of Machiavelli's writing. He observed that the prince who was most vulnerable was always the one who could be predicted. Predictability is weakness. When your enemies, your competitors, your Circumstances know exactly what you will do when pressure arrives. They can plan around you. They can neutralize you before you even move. But the man who is consistent in his execution and yet emotionally unreadable is a different proposition entirely. You cannot plan around him. You cannot wait him out. You cannot provoke a reaction and use that reaction against him. He has removed the levers, and a man without levers is genuinely frightening to anyone who has been relying on those levers to manage him. Think about the people in your own life who have had power over your mood. How did they do it? They found a lever. They discovered something you needed from them: approval, acceptance, the relief of not being judged, and they used that need, consciously or not, to pull you in directions that serve them. The path to removing those levers is not to become cold or to stop caring about people entirely. It is to stop needing things from people who have not earned the right to hold those needs. Your emotional stability cannot be outsourced. Your sense of identity cannot depend on external confirmation. The moment it does, you are fragile, and fragile things break. Machiavelli watched this dynamic play out in the courts of Florence. He watched princes who were brilliant strategists crumble the moment someone they trusted withdrew their support, because they had built their internal architecture on a foundation that existed outside themselves. And when that foundation shifted, everything above it collapsed. He understood that the only truly secure form of power is the power that is entirely self-generated. That which comes from inside you cannot be taken. That which you borrow from the approval of others is always one withdrawal away from disappearing. So you build it internally. You build it through repetition, through showing up when you said you would, through finishing what you start, through keeping promises to yourself when no one else would ever know if you broke them, because that is where character is actually constructed, not in the visible moments, in the invisible ones. The workout no one saw, the work session at 11 o'clock at night when you could have justified watching something instead, the meal you did not eat, the conversation you did not start because it would have been wasted energy. Every single one of those invisible moments is a brick, and you are building something, brick by brick, in the dark, with no audience. That is where the real structure comes from. And here is what most people fundamentally miss about this process. They think the goal is a finished building, a destination, the point at which they can finally relax because the work is done. There is no such point. The discipline is the life. The consistency is the identity. You do not become disciplined and then stop practicing discipline. You become a person for whom disciplined behavior is simply what they do. It is not an effort anymore. It is the shape of who you are. That transformation from effort to identity is the real threshold. And most people never cross it because they are treating self-discipline like a diet rather than like a surgery. They are making temporary changes in behavior rather than permanent alterations in character. Machiavelli would have recognized this distinction immediately. He spent his life studying the difference between men who held power momentarily and men who built it in a way that was durable. The ones who lasted were never the ones who acted powerful. They were the ones who had actually restructured themselves at the level of their values and their habits, until power was simply the natural expression of how they lived. Now let us go somewhere most motivational content refuses to go. Let us talk about loss, because the process of becoming this person is not purely additive. You will not simply add discipline to the life you already have. You will lose things relationships that could not survive your elevation, social dynamics that depended on you being smaller than you are becoming, a version of yourself that was comfortable and familiar and ultimately limiting. People are going to react. Some of them will call it arrogance. Some of them will say, "You have changed," as though change is an accusation. Some of them will find subtle ways to pull you back toward the version of you that did not make them feel left behind. You must be prepared for this. Not with hostility, with clarity. Machiavelli was very specific about this. He warned repeatedly against cruelty for its own sake, but he was equally clear that sentiment, the kind that causes you to maintain relationships out of obligation rather than genuine alignment, is one of the most reliable destroyers of a man's long-term trajectory. You do not need to hate the people who cannot move with you, but you cannot carry them either. The weight of other people's ceiling will become your ceiling if you are not careful, and at a certain point, the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to stop pretending that your paths are the same. This is the part of the Machiavellian philosophy that people find most difficult to absorb. Not the strategic elements, not the psychological tactics, the emotional cost of actual discipline. Because real discipline is not just about your morning routine or your diet or your work ethic. It is about being willing to rearrange your entire existence around a standard that most people will not understand. It is about looking at every area of your life and asking with brutal honesty whether the things and the people in it are building towards something or whether they are just filling space. Most people fill space. They accumulate habits and relationships and commitments without ever asking whether those things are serving the person they are trying to become. And then one day, they look up and wonder why they feel trapped. They are not trapped by their circumstances. They are trapped by the accumulation of every undisciplined yes. Every time they said yes to comfort when they should have said yes to growth. Every time they stayed in a situation past the point where it had anything left to offer them, because leaving required a conversation they did not want to have. You are going to have those conversations. Not because you enjoy conflict, because you value your time and your trajectory more than you value the temporary discomfort of honesty. Here is what changes when you actually make this shift. When you stop asking for permission, when you stop performing your ambitions, when you stop reacting to every provocation and every attempt to destabilize you, you begin to radiate a quality that is genuinely rare. Certainty, not arrogance, not the loud confidence of someone who needs to convince you they are powerful. The quiet certainty of someone who has already decided who they are, decided what they are building, decided how they move. And that quality, that particular frequency of settled, unshakable self-possession is extraordinarily difficult to manufacture. You cannot fake it with affirmations. You cannot buy it with a morning routine you saw on YouTube. It only comes from the actual accumulated evidence of your own reliability, from having tested yourself in the dark and found that you did not quit. Machiavelli observed that the prince who had genuine self-mastery was the most difficult opponent in any arena. Not because he was the strongest, not because he was the most clever, because he could not be rattled. You could not create uncertainty in him by threatening what he valued, because he had reduced his dependencies to almost nothing. You could not exhaust him because his energy did not come from external motivation. It came from something internal that did not fluctuate with circumstances. He was, in the truest sense, a closed system, self-contained, self-generating, immune to the standard weapons of manipulation. That is the target. Not wealth, not status, not the admiration of people who did not believe in you. The target is that internal state, that complete and total self-sufficiency of will, because everything else, the results, the recognition, the life that is actually worth living, flows from that place. It cannot flow from anywhere else in a sustainable way. Let me leave you with this. There is a version of your life that is already built. It is the version you are living right now, the accumulated result of every decision you have made up to this point. And then, there is the version that is possible. The version that exists in the gap between who you are right now and what you are genuinely capable of. That gap is not filled with talent. It is not filled with luck or connection or opportunity. It is filled with the decisions you have not made yet. The discomfort you have not yet been willing to sit inside. The version of yourself you have not yet been willing to become because becoming it required killing something comfortable. Machiavelli wrote from exile, stripped of his position, his influence, his access to the corridors of power he had spent his life navigating. And in that stripping away, in that forced solitude, he produced something that has outlasted every prince he ever advised. Because when you take everything else away, what remains is the only thing that was ever truly yours to begin with. Your mind, your clarity, your capacity to see the world as it actually is and to act accordingly. That is what discipline builds. Not a body, not a bank account, a mind that is yours. Completely, irreversibly, terrifyingly yours. A mind that does not wait for the right conditions, that does not negotiate with its own weakness, that does not need the world to confirm what it already knows about itself. When you build that, you become something people do not have a category for. They will try to reduce you. They will try to find the button that still works, the lever that still moves you, and they will find nothing. And in that nothing, in that complete absence of exploitable weakness, they will feel something they cannot name, something that looks a lot like fear. Good. Let them feel it. You have work to do.